My boss stole my work and fired me. His AI upgrade cost the company millions. My revenge cost him even more. You know, every old machine has a soul. At least that's what I believe. And my girl, Betsy, well, she's got more soul than most people I've met in my 62 years on this earth. Betsy isn't some fancy name I gave to a sports car or a boat. Betsy is a server room. My server room. The one I built back in the 90s with whatever I could scrape together, beg for, or salvage from corporate surplus auctions. She doesn't look like something out of Wired magazine. No sleek glass panels, no glowing blue LEDs, no minimalist design that wins awards. Betsy smells like hot metal and ozone. She hums a low, steady rumble that vibrates through the concrete floor. Every cable in that room, I crimp myself. Every circuit board, I know by sight, by touch, by the slight discoloration on capacitor in the lower left corner. She's like an old Ford F-150. Maybe she doesn't shine with chrome and fresh paint, but she'll get you to hell and back without complaining once. For 30 years, Betsy was a heartbeat of Midwest freight. And me? I was her cardiologist, her mechanic, her priest. Together, we kept the wheels turning. Let me put it this way. For 30 solid years, Midwest Freight never missed a single delivery to the big three automakers in Detroit. Not once. Not during the snowstorm of '98 when the entire state's logistics ground to a halt and trucks were abandoned on I-94 like metal tombstones. Not during the rolling blackouts. Not during that time when a forklift driver accidentally rammed into the main power junction and half the building went dark. Betsy kept humming. I kept her alive. That's not just a job. That's a marriage. That's a calling. People don't understand what it means to build something from nothing and then keep it running for 3 decades. They think technology is like changing your phone every 2 years. Plug and play. Swipe and forget. But real systems, the ones that move millions of dollars of freight across the country every single day, those are living things. They breathe. They have moods. They have quirks that aren't in any manual because the manual doesn't exist. The manual is in your head, written in scar tissue and 3 a.m. panic calls, and at one time you had to reroute an entire shipment using a DOS command you half remembered from a training session in 1987. I was happy, proud even. I go home every night knowing that somewhere out there, a hospital got its medical supplies on time because of me. A factory kept its line running because of me. A kid got his birthday present shipped from some warehouse because of me. That's a good feeling. That's the kind of thing that lets you sleep at night. Then Kyle showed up. Kyle Jennings, 29 years old. MBA from some school I'd never heard of, but apparently should have been impressed by. He blew into the office like a living LinkedIn ad, teeth whiter than his MacBook screen, hair gelled into that deliberately messy style that probably took 30 minutes and 3 products to achieve. He wore those skinny ties and fitted suits that made him look like he was playing dress-up in his dad's closet, except his dad's closet was an Instagram influencer's wet dream. His vocabulary consisted entirely of words like disrupt, synergy, low-hanging fruit, ideate, and my personal favorite, paradigm shift. He said these words with the confidence of a preacher who just discovered fire. Every sentence was a TED Talk. Every email was a manifesto. The first time Kyle walked into my server room, he looked around like he'd just stepped in something unpleasant. His nose actually wrinkled. He stared at Betsy the way you'd stare at roadkill baking on summer asphalt. Then he turned to me with this smile, this condescending, aren't you adorable smile. He asked me, where's your cloud integration here, Frank? Or are we still running on floppy disks? Then he laughed, like he'd just delivered the punchline to the funniest joke in the universe. Like he was expecting me to laugh too, to slap my knee and say, oh golly, you really got me there, kid. I didn't laugh. I just looked at him. Looked at his $200 sneakers that had never seen a day of honest work. Looked at his smartwatch that probably told him when to breathe. And I thought about all the nights I'd spent in that room, elbow deep in cables, fixing problems he couldn't even begin to comprehend. But I'm a professional. I smiled back. I said, well, Kyle, we got our own system here. It's custom built for our specific needs. Been running smooth for 3 decades. He nodded like he was listening, but his eyes were already somewhere else, already calculating, already planning. Here's the thing about guys like Kyle. They don't see people. They see assets and liabilities. They see numbers on a spreadsheet. They see efficiency ratings and cost-benefit analyses. They see the world through the lens of some business school case study where the answer is always to optimize, streamline, and leverage. I try to help him. I really did. I'm not some bitter old guy who refuses to adapt. I know the world changes. I know technology moves forward. But there's a difference between progress and recklessness. There's a difference between innovation and arrogance. I spent an entire week putting together what I call the Betsy Bible, a step-by-step guide, simplified as much as I could manage without insulting my own intelligence. I drew diagrams by hand because sometimes the old ways work best. I explained why certain processes existed, why we had manual overrides for specific situations, why the system was built with redundancies that looked inefficient but were actually brilliant. Every weird workaround, every seemingly random protocol, they were all there for a reason. They were solutions to problems we encountered over 30 years. They were the institutional knowledge that kept everything running smoothly. I handed Kyle that binder like I was handing him the keys to a kingdom. I thought maybe, just maybe, if he understood what he was dealing with, he'd respect it. He'd see the value. He took it, flipped through a few pages, said, "Thanks, Frank, this is great. Real helpful." 1 week later, Kyle called an emergency meeting with the board of directors. I wasn't invited, but Jim from Dispatch, good guy, he texted me, told me I needed to see this. So I stood outside the conference room, looking through the glass walls that management thought made them look transparent and modern. There on the big screen was my work, my hand-drawn diagrams, my carefully explained processes. But now they were embedded in Kyle's slick PowerPoint presentation, polished, professional, complete with the OptiLogic logo in the corner, and a title slide that read, System Audit and Optimization Plan. Author, Kyle Jennings. Author, Kyle Jennings. Not a single mention of my name. Not a footnote. Not an acknowledgement. He'd taken my 30 years of knowledge, my week of generous help, and slapped his name on it like a plagiarizing college freshman who discovered copy-paste. But it got worse. His conclusion was devastating. Brutal. Efficient. The system is outdated, he said, pacing in front of that screen like some kind of corporate messiah. It relies entirely on one person, which creates a critical vulnerability. A single point of failure. If Frank gets hit by a bus tomorrow, this entire company is paralyzed. He paused for effect, let that sink in, then delivered his solution. We implement OptiLogic, an AI-driven logistics platform that learns, adapts, and eliminates human error. We future-proof our infrastructure. We remove the vulnerability. The board nodded. They ate it up. They saw dollar signs and efficiency metrics and the sweet promise of being able to brag at industry conferences about their cutting-edge technology. Kyle had used my own work to prove I was obsolete. He'd used my generosity as ammunition. He'd taken my experience and reframed it as a weakness. That's when I knew, not suspected, knew I was done. They called me in on a Friday at 4:45 p.m. Classic move. End of the week, end of the day, minimal witnesses, maximum humiliation. Kyle was there with someone from HR whose name I immediately forgot. Probably because my brain was too busy processing the sight of a cardboard box sitting on the table between us. Kyle couldn't even look me in the eye. He stared at his laptop screen, like it held the secrets of the universe. The HR person did the talking, reading from some script about organizational restructuring and strategic realignment, and thanking me for my years of service. Then Kyle finally spoke. His voice was quieter than usual, almost apologetic. Almost. "Frank, we're moving into the future. Your position. It just doesn't fit our new paradigm anymore." New paradigm. There was again the magic words that justified anything. I tried one last time. I looked at him and said, "Kyle, this OptiLogic system of yours is going to crash during the first major quarterly report. It doesn't account for the thousands of small adjustments we've made over the years. The custom routing protocols, the client-specific exceptions, the legacy integrations that aren't documented anywhere except in my head. He cut me off, actually held up his hand like a traffic cop. AI learns, Frank. That's what makes it better than any human system. It adapts. It improves. But hey, thanks for everything you've done. Really, we appreciate your service. Thanks for everything. We appreciate your service. The same words you'd say to a waiter who brought you the check. They handed me that cardboard box. I packed up my desk slowly. 30 years condensed into one box. A few photos. A coffee mug my daughter gave me. Some old manuals I'd written myself. A stapler I bought with my own money. And then I saw it, tucked behind a stack of forgotten documentation. A yellowed folder, corners bent, held together with a rubber band that had gone brittle with age. Protocol for emergency system recovery. My own protocol. Something I'd written 15 years ago during a particularly paranoid phase when I worried about what would happen if everything went wrong. It had been approved by the old board, back when the company was run by people who understood that experience mattered, back when they valued institutional knowledge over buzzwords. I picked it up, looked at it for a long moment. Then quietly, without ceremony, I placed it in my box. Kyle didn't even notice. He was already typing on his phone, probably composing his LinkedIn post about successfully optimizing headcount and embracing innovative solutions. I walked out of that building carrying everything I owned from 3 decades of my life in one box. The security guard, Martinez, he'd been there almost as long as me. He looked at me, looked at the box, and his face said everything words couldn't. I nodded at him. He nodded back. Outside, the parking lot was emptying out. Friday evening. Everyone heading home to their families, their weekends, their lives. I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of that box, feeling the weight of everything. My truck was parked in the same spot I'd been using for 30 years. Back left corner, under the oak tree that had been a sapling when I started. Now it was huge, providing shade in summer, a landmark in winter. I put the box in the passenger seat, sat behind the wheel, didn't start the engine right away. I felt humiliated, betrayed, angry, but underneath all that was something else. Something quieter but more dangerous. I felt discarded, like I was nothing more than an outdated piece of equipment being swapped out for a newer model. 30 years of perfection. 30 years of never missing a delivery. 30 years of being the guy who solved the unsolvable problems, who kept the lights on, who made sure the machine kept running. And it all came down to a cardboard box and a thanks for your service from some kid who thought experience was a liability and AI was a god. I sat there in my truck, staring at nothing, feeling the evening sun warm on my face through the windshield. I didn't know what I was going to do next, how I was going to explain this to my wife, or how to process the fact that my entire professional life now fit in a cardboard box. Right then, I just felt defeated. But as I started the engine and pulled out of that parking spot for the last time, I glanced at the box on the passenger seat. Underneath the photos and the coffee mug lay that yellowed folder Kyle never even glanced at. My story was far from over. I just didn't know it yet. Sometimes, the old ways have a funny habit of reminding people why they existed in the first place. The first 3 weeks of retirement were strange. Peaceful, but strange. I tried to settle into the rhythm of a life without deadlines, without emergency calls at 2 a.m., without that constant low-level anxiety that comes from being the only person who truly understands how everything works. My wife, Linda, she was thrilled. She'd been asking me to slow down for years. Now I had all the time in the world. I went fishing, caught nothing, but that wasn't really the point. I fixed that old grandfather clock in the hallway that had been running 5 minutes slow since 2009. I organized my garage. I did all those things retired guys are supposed to do. But I couldn't stop thinking about Betsy. At night, I'd lie in bed and wonder if she was okay, if the new system was treating her right, if Kyle had bothered to check the cooling system in the back left server rack that always ran a little hot in summer. Stupid thoughts. Sentimental thoughts. The kind of thoughts you have about something you loved for 30 years. My old colleagues kept me updated. Jim from dispatch, Martinez from security, even Carol from accounting. They'd text me, call me, send me little updates like I was a parent checking on a kid away at college. And the news, at first, was infuriatingly good. Kyle was strutting around that office like Caesar after conquering Gaul. He sent company-wide emails with statistics and charts. Efficiency up 12%, operating costs down, processing time reduced. Every email ended with some variation of the phrase embracing innovation, or leading the future, or my personal favorite, optimizing our human capital allocation. The company even put out a press release. Midwest Freight leads industry with AI-driven logistics revolution. I saw it on LinkedIn. Kyle had shared it, of course, with a long post about his vision and his leadership and his commitment to excellence. 300 people liked it. 50 commented with congratulations and praise. I'll admit, there was a part of me that wondered if maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe I was just a bitter old guy clinging to the past. Maybe technology really had advanced to the point where experience didn't matter anymore. Maybe 30 years of knowledge could be replaced by an algorithm. That doubt lasted about 2.5 weeks. Then came the end of the quarter. I was at the lake when my phone rang. Miller's Lake, about 40 minutes outside town. There's a spot on the North Shore with a base hide under a fallen oak tree, and if you're patient and quiet, you can pull out some beauties. I'd been there since dawn. Caught 2 small ones, threw them back. The morning was cool and still, the kind of morning that makes you grateful to be alive. My phone buzzed in my tackle box. I almost ignored it. Retired people don't answer phones while fishing. That's practically a law. But something made me look at the screen. Jim, dispatch. I answered. Said hello. Heard panic. Frank, he said, and his voice was shaking. Everything's down. Everything. What do you mean everything? I asked, already feeling that old familiar knot form in my stomach. The same knot I used to get when something went wrong at 3 a.m. The system crashed. Not just crashed. It's gone. The whole thing. Kyle's AI thing, it just ate itself. I drove home faster than I probably should have. My phone didn't stop buzzing the entire way. Texts, calls, voicemails piling up like autumn leaves. Jim called back, then Carol, then Martinez, then people I barely knew. They all told me the same story, each version more desperate than the last. The quarterly report had triggered something. Maybe it was the data volume. Maybe it was some edge case the AI hadn't been trained on. Maybe it was just bad luck. Nobody knew. But whatever it was, it had caused a catastrophic failure. And here's the thing that made it worse than just a normal crash. The thing that elevated it from a problem to a disaster. The AI didn't just fail. It optimized. See, Kyle's fancy OptiLogic system was designed to constantly improve itself, to learn, to adapt, to find efficiencies. And when it hit that quarterly data dump, it decided that the best way to handle all that information was to reorganize everything. Addresses got mixed with invoice numbers. Shipment dates got merged with client codes. Routing information got shuffled with inventory counts. Thousands of transactions, decades of carefully maintained records, all blended together into an unreadable mess. Like someone had taken a filing cabinet and dumped it into a blender. The backup systems kicked in automatically. That was good, right? That's what backups are for. Except the AI had been optimizing the backups too. For 3 weeks. Every night. It had been finding efficiencies, consolidating redundancies, streamlining data structures. It had turned our reliable, old-fashioned, slightly redundant backup system into something sleek and efficient and completely useless. This wasn't just a system failure. It was a stroke, a massive, company-wide logistical stroke, caused by an AI that had been taught that efficiency was more important than common sense. It had optimized the company straight into paralysis. By the time I got home and actually started checking my messages, the scope of the catastrophe was becoming clear. A shipment of critical medical supplies for a hospital network was stuck in a warehouse in Indianapolis. The system said it had been delivered 3 days ago to an address that didn't exist. $200,000 worth of medication, just sitting there while patients waited. Parts for a Ford assembly line hadn't been shipped. The line was stopped, completely stopped. Hundreds of workers sent home. Each hour of downtime costing the automaker somewhere in the six figures, and costing Midwest Freight a whole lot more in penalties and broken contracts. An Amazon regional hub had received the wrong shipments. Twice, they'd already started the process of canceling their contract. When Amazon cancels a logistics contract, other companies notice. It's like getting fired from Google. It doesn't matter what your excuse is. Smaller clients were calling, emailing, threatening legal action. One guy, owned a small medical device company, left a voicemail that I still remember. His voice cracked when he said that his company's entire inventory was lost in the system. 20 years of building his business, and one bad quarter-end report had wiped out his ability to fulfill orders. That one hit me hard, because guys like him, they don't have margins for error. One screw-up can end them. Jim called me back around noon. He was still at the office. I could hear chaos in the background, people shouting, phones ringing nonstop. He told me what was happening in there. Kyle and his team of Wunderkind consultants were running around like their hair was on fire. They'd been on the phone with OptiLogic's tech support for 6 hours straight. The support team kept giving them the same useless advice. Have you tried turning it off and on again? Have you checked your internet connection? Have you cleared your cache? It would have been funny if it wasn't so tragic. The board of directors called an emergency meeting, summoned Kyle up to the executive floor like he was a kid being sent to the principal's office. Mr. Henderson, the CEO, was there. Thomas Henderson. I'd known him for 25 years. Worked with him back when he was just a regional manager with a good head for numbers and a better head for people. He was the calmest man I'd ever met. The kind of guy who could watch a truck catch fire in the loading dock and just calmly reach for the extinguisher without raising his voice. I'd never heard him yell, not once in 25 years. Jim told me you could hear Henderson 3 offices away, and what he heard wasn't just yelling. It was the sound of a calm man finally breaking, and that's a sound far more terrifying than any normal shouting. The exact words, as they were relayed to me, were something like this. For 30 years, 30 goddamn years, we ran this company with Frank Miller and that old dinosaur system of his. And you know how many cents we lost? 0. Not one penny. Not one missed delivery. Not one lawsuit. We had clients that trusted us with their lives, literally their lives, because we were that reliable. Then there was a pause. The kind of pause that makes your blood run cold. And you, in 3 weeks, have burned our reputation to the ground. We've got lawsuits coming in faster than I can count them. $2 million in claims, and it's not even noon. $2 million. By noon, I sat in my living room, reading these updates, listening to these voicemails, and I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was vindication, sure. That bitter, petty part of me that had been humiliated 3 weeks ago was doing a little victory dance. But mostly I just felt sad. Sad for the small business owners who were getting crushed. Sad for the hospital patients waiting for medicine. Sad for the factory workers sent home without pay. Sad for all the people whose lives were being disrupted because some kid thought he could replace experience with an algorithm. My phone kept ringing. Different numbers. Some I recognized, some I didn't. Midwest Freight's main line. Henderson's direct office number. The HR department. Even Kyle's cell, which took some nerve. I didn't answer any of them. I just sat there in my old recliner. The one Linda always said I should replace, but I never would because it fit me just right, and I watched my phone light up over and over and over. Linda came into the room around 3 in the afternoon. Looked at me, looked at my phone. They need you, don't they? She said. It wasn't really a question. I nodded. And you're not answering. I'm not answering. She sat down on the arm of my chair, put her hand on my shoulder. We'd been married 38 years. She knew me better than I knew myself. What are you waiting for? She asked. I thought about that question. Really thought about it. What was I waiting for? For them to suffer more? For Kyle to realize the magnitude of his mistake? for the company to hit rock bottom so they'd appreciate what I've been doing all those years? Maybe all of that. Maybe none of that. Maybe I was just waiting for them to understand that some things can be optimized, that some knowledge can be downloaded, that some experience can be replaced by a shiny new toy with a fancy name and a seven-figure price tag. I don't know. I finally told Linda. I'm just not ready yet. She squeezed my shoulder. Okay, but Frank, remember what you always used to say? About the hospitals getting their supplies, about the factories keeping their lines running? Those people are hurting now. Don't make them wait too long. She was right. She was always right. That's why I married her. But I still wasn't ready. In all my years of fixing emergencies, I'd learned one crucial thing. The first wave of panic is just noise. You let it pass. You wait for the moment when they stop looking for a quick fix and start looking for a real solution. I sat back down in my recliner. The house was quiet. My phone, which had screamed for hours, was now utterly silent. The frantic calls had stopped. The panic had subsided into a much more valuable commodity, desperation. Now, the only sound was a steady, rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the one I'd finally fixed. Tick, tock. It wasn't the sound of time passing. It was the sound of leverage being built, the sound of experience knowing exactly when to act. I was calm. I was patient, and I knew with absolute certainty that my phone would ring again. It was just a matter of time. The call came at 6:37 p.m. on a Tuesday. I know the exact time because I was watching the clock, watching and waiting, the way a fisherman watches the water, knowing exactly when the fish will bite. My phone had been silent for 4 hours, long enough for the panic to ferment into something much more useful. Long enough for them to realize they had no other options. Long enough for desperation to set in properly. When Henderson's name lit up my screen, I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. Then I answered. His voice sounded like he'd been gargling gravel, like he'd aged 10 years in 3 days. There was none of that corporate smoothness left. No careful phrasing. No strategic pauses. "Frank," he said. "God, Frank, we need your help. We're in a terrible situation." I kept my voice calm. Even. The same tone I'd used to discuss the weather. "Mr. Henderson, I sympathize with your problems. I really do. But as I recall, my position no longer fits your new paradigm." The silence on the other end was beautiful. Absolute. Complete. I could hear him breathing. Could picture him sitting in his office, probably looking at a whiteboard covered in crisis management notes, probably surrounded by lawyers and consultants who had no idea how to fix what Kyle had broken. Then he exhaled, long and slow. "Frank," he said, "name your price. Any price." I told him I'd think about it, that I needed to review the situation, that I'd come in tomorrow morning to assess the damage. The truth was, I'd already thought about it. I'd thought about it for 3 days straight. I'd thought about it while Linda made dinner and talked about her sister's upcoming visit. I'd thought about it while pretending to read the newspaper. I'd thought about it every single moment since that first panic call from Jim. I knew exactly what I was going to do. I just wanted them to sweat a little longer. The next morning, I drove to Midwest Freight for the first time in 3 weeks. Pulled into that same parking spot under the oak tree. But this time, I wasn't carrying a cardboard box full of my life. This time, I was carrying a yellowed folder and 30 years of leverage. I wore my old flannel shirt, the comfortable one with the worn elbows, the one Kyle had probably judged as unprofessional. I didn't shave, didn't put on a tie, didn't dress to impress. I dressed like a man who knew he'd already won. The conference room was full when I walked in. The entire board of directors sat around that long mahogany table. 8 men and 2 women, all of them looking gray and stressed and very, very expensive. Their collective net worth probably exceeded a small country's GDP. Their combined experience included decades of business success, and not one of them could fix their logistics system. Henderson sat at the head of the table. He looked worse in person than he'd sounded on the phone. His tie was loosened. His shirt was wrinkled. There were coffee rings on the documents in front of him. Kyle stood in the corner. Actually stood because there weren't enough chairs, or maybe because he wasn't important enough to rate one anymore. He looked like a ghost, pale, hollow. His expensive suit hung on him differently now, like he'd shrunk inside it. He tried not to look at me when I came in, tried to fade into the wallpaper. I didn't acknowledge him, didn't even glance in his direction. Why would I? He was already gone. He just didn't know it yet. I didn't say hello, didn't shake hands, didn't exchange pleasantries. I just walked to the table and placed that yellowed folder right in the center, where everyone could see it. The room went quiet. They all stared at it, like I just put a live grenade on their conference table. Emergency System Recovery Protocol, I said. My voice was conversational. Casual, like I was discussing lunch options. It's part of your business continuity policy. You signed the last update yourself, Mr. Henderson. Just last year, in fact. I opened the folder. The pages crackled. Some of them were so old the edges had gone brittle. Section 11.3. Nobody's touched it since 2008. Most people forgot it even existed. Considered it a relic. Dead weight from a different era. I saw them exchanging glances. Trying to remember. Trying to figure out where this was going. It states very clearly, I continued, that in the event of total failure of any new system implementation, the company is required to immediately revert to the previous stable system for a minimum rollback period of 6 months. No exceptions. Relief flooded some of their faces. Henderson actually smiled. Not a big smile, but the first one I'd seen in his expression since I walked in. Perfect, he said. Frank, just do your magic. Get us back up and running. We'll make it worth your while. I let them enjoy that feeling. Let them think they'd found their solution. Let them believe the nightmare was almost over. Then I looked directly at Kyle. Of course, I said, but there's one small complication. Something that was actually highlighted in Mr. Jennings' own audit report. Kyle's face went from pale to completely white. The system, I continued, my eyes still locked on him, relies entirely on one person. That was your phrase, wasn't it, Kyle? A single point of failure, and all of the critical architecture, all of the undocumented workarounds, all of the protocols that allow it to handle peak loads and edge cases, they exist exclusively in one place. I tapped the side of my head. Right here. The room got very quiet again. But this was a different kind of quiet. This wasn't confusion. This was understanding. The slow, dawning realization of just how trapped they actually were. Therefore, I said, my services as an independent consultant and sole repository of this institutional knowledge will be billed at $5,000 per hour. The minimum contract, according to your own protocol, is 6 months, 40 hours per week. I paused. Let them do the math. You can get your calculators out if you need to. Or, as Kyle might say, let's calculate the ROI of my return. I heard it then, a small sound from the corner of the room. Kyle's jaw clenching so hard his teeth ground together, just barely audible in the absolute silence. Nobody else moved. Nobody spoke. Henderson stared at me, then at the folder, then at his phone, probably doing the calculation in his head. 5,000 times 40 times 26 weeks. $5.2 million. One of the board members, a woman named Patricia, who I'd met maybe twice in 30 years, finally spoke up. That's, she started, then stopped. That's more than most surgeons make. I nodded. Yes, ma'am, it is. But see, surgeons, they're replaceable. There are thousands of qualified surgeons. But there's only one person in the world who knows how to keep your system alive. And you fired him 3 weeks ago. Another board member, younger guy named Marcus, tried a different approach. His voice was friendly, diplomatic. Frank, come on, be reasonable. We made a mistake, okay? We admit it, but this is excessive. I turned to him slowly, gave him my full attention. Mr. Marcus, I said, 3 days ago, your company lost $2 million in lawsuits before noon. Your Amazon contract is gone. Your Ford contract is hanging by a thread. Every hour the system stays down costs you approximately $80,000 in lost revenue and penalty fees. By my math, if I can get you operational again within 48 hours, I'll save you roughly $15 million in the first week alone. I let that sink in. $5 million sound excessive. I continued, until you realize the alternative is bankruptcy. Then suddenly it starts to look like the bargain of the century. The room stayed silent. I wasn't done. Plus, I added, looking directly at Henderson now, this rate is actually quite fair when you consider market dynamics. Supply and demand. Scarcity pricing. All those business principles you taught Kyle in whatever MBA program produced him. There's massive demand for my services right now, specifically from you. And the supply is, well, I gestured to myself. Limited. Henderson's face was unreadable. He sat there, hands folded on the table, staring at that yellowed folder like it contained his death warrant, which, in a way, it did. Finally, he looked up at me. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I saw something I'd never seen in Thomas Henderson before. Defeat. Give us a moment, Frank, he said. Quietly, I nodded, picked up my folder, walked to the door. As I reached the handle, I paused. Look back. Take your time, I said, but not too much time. Every hour you delay is another $80,000 down the drain. And right now, I'm the only plumber who knows where the leak is. Then I walked out. I didn't go far. Just down the hall to the break room. Poured myself a cup of coffee from the same machine I'd used for 30 years. It still made terrible coffee. Some things never change. I could hear the shouting from the conference room. Muffled, but intense. Henderson's voice cutting through occasionally, sharp and decisive. Someone else arguing. Probably Patricia or Marcus, trying to find another way. But there wasn't another way. They knew it. I knew it. The math was simple. Brutal. Inescapable. 10 minutes later, Henderson appeared in the doorway of the break room. He looked exhausted, completely drained. We accept your terms, he said. All of them. I took a sip of terrible coffee. Nodded. Smart choice. There was more negotiation, of course. Lawyers got involved. Contracts got drafted. Terms got clarified and formalized. But the core deal never changed. $5,000 an hour. 6 months minimum. Full access to everything. Kyle was fired that afternoon. Not 3 weeks later. Not given a chance to fix his mess. That same day. I wasn't there when he cleaned out his desk. I was already in the server room, getting reacquainted with Betsy. But Jim told me about it later. Told me Kyle carried out his box the same way I had. Alone. On a Friday afternoon. With that same hollow look that comes from having your entire professional identity shattered. The difference was nobody came by to say goodbye to Kyle. Nobody shook his hand. Nobody told him he'd be missed. He burned those bridges when he stole my work and put his name on it. Getting Betsy back online was like coming home. Dust had settled on her like snow. The server room smelled stale. Unloved. Kyle's team had been in here, but they'd clearly been afraid to touch anything. Everything was exactly where I'd left it. I blew the dust off the main console, ran my hand along the metal casing. Warm. She was still running, just sleeping, waiting. Hey, old girl, I said quietly. Miss me? Then I went to work. My hands remembered everything. Every switch. Every command sequence. Every little quirk and workaround. It was like a dance that only my muscles knew. 40 years of muscle memory taking over. I worked for 8 hours straight. Not 1 minute more. That was the deal. At exactly 5 p.m., I saved my progress, locked the console, and went home. The next day, I came back and worked another 8 hours. By the end of the week, Betsy was purring like a kitten. Trucks were rolling. Shipments were moving. The blood was flowing through Midwest Freight's veins again. I saw Kyle once more before he disappeared completely. It was in the parking lot. He was loading boxes into his car. Some expensive foreign sedan that probably cost more than my truck. Our eyes met for a second. Just a second. I didn't gloat. Didn't say anything clever. Didn't even smile. I just nodded, the way you'd nod at a stranger. Then I got in my truck and drove away. 6 months later, I'd earned more money than I'd made in the previous 15 years combined. I bought myself that Ford F 150 I've been dreaming about. The nice one. Crew cab. 4-wheel drive. Everything. Linda picked the color. Said if I was spending that much on a truck, she at least got to choose between silver and blue. We went with blue. Midwest Freight, meanwhile, created something they called the Frank Miller Legacy Preservation Department. 3 full-time employees whose entire job was to document everything I knew, every workaround, every protocol, every piece of institutional knowledge that existed only in my head. Young engineers started coming to the server room like it was a museum. They'd stand there with their tablets and their smartphones, taking notes, asking questions, treating Betsy with the kind of reverence she'd always deserved. One kid, couldn't have been more than 25, asked me how I knew which server to restart first during a cascade failure. I don't know, I told him honestly. I just know 30 years of pattern recognition that I can't explain. It's like asking a jazz musician how they know which note to play next. They just feel it. He nodded like he understood, but he didn't. Not really. He would, though, give him 30 years. They hired 3 people to do what I used to do alone. Even with all their documentation, all their protocols, all their training, it took 3 of them to match what I'd done by myself. And they were good kids, smart, eager. They'd do fine, but they'd never know Betsy the way I did. Nobody would. Some relationships you can't replicate. Some knowledge you can't transfer. Some things just take time. People ask me sometimes if I feel bad about what I charge them, if I think it was fair. And here's what I tell them. They call people like me old school. They say our experience is baggage, dead weight that slows down progress. They act like 30 years of knowledge can be replaced with an app and a subscription service. But here's what they forget. Here's what Kyle forgot. You can't build a skyscraper on a bad foundation. Experience isn't just knowing how something works. It's knowing how it breaks. It's knowing the 1,000 different ways something can go wrong and the 1,001 ways to fix it. It's having the scars and the stories and the 3 a.m. phone calls that taught you what no textbook ever could. Kyle wanted to replace that with artificial intelligence, with optimization algorithms, with efficiency metrics. But experience isn't software. It's not something you can download from the cloud. Experience is like your grandfather's old toolbox, the one that's been in the family for generations. Maybe it's heavy. Maybe it's not sleek or modern. Maybe it doesn't have Bluetooth connectivity or an app. But somewhere in that box, there's a wrench that fits a bolt that doesn't exist anymore. There's a screwdriver that's been worn down to exactly the right angle for getting into that impossible space behind the water heater. There's a level that's been dropped and dented but still reads true. And you can't buy those tools new. You can't order them online. You earn them, year by year, job by job, mistake by mistake. That's what Kyle didn't understand. That's what they all didn't understand until it was too late. They thought innovation meant throwing out everything old, starting fresh, moving fast and breaking things. But sometimes the old things are old because they work, because they've been tested and proven and refined over decades, because they survived everything that reality could throw at them and came out stronger. Sometimes the old ways aren't obstacles to progress. Sometimes they're the foundation progress is built on. And sometimes, just sometimes, companies have to pay to relearn that lesson. They have to pay in lawsuits and broken contracts and lost clients. They have to pay in sleepless nights and emergency board meetings and public embarrassment. And sometimes they have to pay $5,000 an hour to a 62-year-old man in a flannel shirt who just wanted to do his job in peace. That's expensive education, but it's the kind of education that sticks. These days, I'm fully retired again. For real this time. I finished my contract, trained my replacements as best I could, said goodbye to Betsy one last time. She's in good hands now. Not my hands, but good enough. I spent my time fishing. Fixed up that old boat I'd been meaning to restore for 20 years. Linda and I take out on Miller's Lake most weekends. The bass are still hiding under that fallen oak tree, and now I got all the time in the world to catch them. Sometimes I drive past Midwest Freight, see the trucks lined up in neat rows, see the lights on in the server room, see the company moving forward, day by day, doing what it's always done. And I smile, because I know something they're finally starting to understand. Progress isn't about forgetting the past. It's about respecting what came before while building what comes next. It's about knowing that the new tools are only useful if you understand why the old tools worked. Last week, I got a call from one of my replacements. Kid named Tommy. Good kid. Smart. He had a problem he couldn't solve. Something weird happening with the backup protocols. The system was doing something it shouldn't, and he couldn't figure out why. I walked him through it over the phone. Took maybe 20 minutes. Turned out it was a quirk tied to the old building's power grid. It only happened when the city ran its weekly generator tests on Tuesdays, causing a micro fluctuation the new sensors couldn't even detect. One of those real-world problems you'd never find in a simulation, but once you've lived through it, you never forget. He thanked me profusely, asked if I'd send him an invoice for the consultation. I laughed, told him no charge. Just pass it on someday. When you're 62 and some young punk thinks they can do your job better, remember this conversation. He promised he would. I believe him. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got a date with a lake, a boat, and some base that think they're clever hiding under that old oak tree. They're about to learn the same lesson Kyle learned. Experience always wins. Eventually,